Yeah, I'm Tricia. I'm a disabled woman, and I was a foster mum. I'm now a shared lives carer to two young people who are called Sam and Lucy. They're 26 and 21, and they've lived with me since they were 10 and 8, respectively. They happen to be autistic. I'm really, really passionate about getting them and everyone what I call gloriously ordinary lives. And in the chat, Victoria, you made a comment about the idea of ordinary versus extraordinary, and how we often are kind of striving for disabled people just living these fantastically extraordinary lives. And actually, it's felt to me for years now that, you know, what I want for my kids is just that rejoicing in the ordinary. And I think perhaps that's become really relevant to all of us this year, over the past year, that we're all really wanting to get back to having an element of ordinariness that perhaps everybody could recognise. So I employ a team of personal assistants who support Sam and Lucy in our family home. And they'll continue to support them as they move into their own homes over the next few months. That's part of the plan. And there's three things, I guess, from your question that I wanted to think about. And the first one is this idea that somehow that people getting really good support and workers having fantastic terms and conditions are not mutually exclusive. It's not either one or the other. So I want the people who support Sam and Lucy to be and feel valued, to love their job and to want to come to work. And my experience is that if that's the case, they're much more likely to come to work, really wanting to do a good job. They're much less likely to call in sick, and they're much more likely to go the extra mile. So I try and make sure they have really good pay, decent holiday allowance, and really, and this is really important for me, that they're supported to bring their skills and gifts to work, to bring their whole self to work. And I'll say a bit more about that later on. It also means that my management role as an employer, I think, has to be really different. And we don't do very much top down in my house. There are some things I've got some bottom lines about, but actually everybody with a very flat structure, everybody has their different roles, but they're encouraged to problem solve, to sort things out themselves as a team, and without kind of feeling that they have to ask permission. So the idea, it's not mutually exclusive. It works really well if we make things work for both sets of people. And the second thing for me is, I think we've really got to see the roles in social care differently. So the narrative at the moment is that people working in social care are heroes or angels, or if something goes wrong, they're bad people who've used social care as a way of abusing vulnerable people. I'm using my quotes, the quotes around vulnerable intentionally there. And images of people, the images that we see around people working in social care are usually some things like somebody leaning in a concerned fashion over someone using a wheelchair, perhaps with their arm around them, somebody holding the hand of an older person. And it just feels, yeah, the word care has become really toxic to me, I'm afraid. In an ordinary world, in our ordinary everyday lives, we talk about caring about someone we love. So we care about people because we love them, we care about them. And in social care, we care for people. And that really bothers me, and it creates an immediate power dynamic. I'm described as a carer, and I really struggle with that. And my team are really, really great at gently correcting when someone asks them if they're Ben or Lucy's carer, and just throwing that back and saying, no, they're not. And the word personal assistance is really important in terms of that power dynamic for me. That's, yeah, personally for me as well as for my two kids. And I think the third thing about this bit for me is if we want this to be the case, I really, really have to make it easy for people who've never seen themselves as wanting to work in social care to become part of the team that I employ. So that means I've got to actively recruit differently and describe the job differently, and to make the job a very different job. So I start with our personal connection. So, you know, who do I know? If I need to employ somebody new, the first thing is I've got an unwritten clause. It's not unwritten, it's a kind of overt but not enforceable through employment law clause built into all our job descriptions, which is when you need to leave, because it's all young people I employ, so they will leave, please can you find me someone else before you go? So that's kind of, yeah, not employable by any employment law, but it's always worked for me. Then we start with our personal connections. Who does Sam, who do Lucy know, who may be a great fit for our team? If I need to advertise, I'm deliberately a bit cryptic. And I try to attract people who've never worked in social care before, and often people who've never heard the word autistic before. Otherwise, I find that people think they know what they need to do in the job, and they think they know who Sam and Lucy are. I use our local connections, places we go, things like Tanya was talking about. My best recruitment agencies are our local cafe, our hairdresser, our local pub, and the climbing centre where Sam climbs. Our interview processes focus on human values, and then 3 of us and great outside trainers can teach people anything else they need to know. I've currently got, I was just chatting up before I spoke, I currently employ an ex-police officer, someone who worked in M&S, someone who worked in the local hospital X-ray department, a chef, a performing arts student, and someone whose last job was in a boatyard. And I had a really lovely conversation as part of a recruitment process with a guy who was a barber who rang, was really embarrassed and said, well, I'm really interested in this role, but I don't know anything about working with people. I'm just a barber. I said, well, if you're a barber, I think you know loads about working with people, and don't you spend your whole day chatting to people while you cut their hair? It's like, yeah, you're right. And they tell me all sorts of things, and we have all these chats. So it's like, helping people think about the skills that are really transferable. And the other bit there is that overtly in the job description is the role that, and we've talked about this a lot today, that as a conduit, they are a conduit to Sam and Lucy making the connections they need to get their gloriously ordinary lives. So they're constantly thinking about supporting and facilitating connections, and therefore they're bringing their own skills and gifts and connections to work, and again, very overtly. And that means that we blur boundaries, and that can make some people a bit worried and a bit confused. But the team are really clear about how they do this, but the boundaries are blurred. My young performing arts student has recently enabled Lucy to join a dance class that she goes to, and that Lucy would never have been able to get to. It's she's a really good dancer, this young woman, and she's managed to get Lucy part of it through her connections, and Lucy loves it. One of Sam's best friends is one of his PAs who supported him when he was 14 to 18. He's become a really good friend. He hasn't been paid to work for us since he was 18, so for 9 years. But their shared interest means they continue to be friends. So blurring of boundaries. So yeah, 3 things for me is it's not mutually exclusive. Great support and a great job is not mutually exclusive. We've got to challenge the heroes and angels piece. And that means we need to recruit differently and describe jobs and make jobs different.